Somebody who came to real estate as a second career, it's not uncommon that when I sit down with somebody for lunch or coffee who knew me before I was a real estate agent, they ask me, how did you get into this? Like, why does this fit for you? And I think maybe the best way for me to describe what appeals to me about being a real estate agent is a story. A few years ago, I was already living here in Colorado, but I grew up in Kansas City, and I got a phone call that my grandfather was really gravely ill and in the hospital and might not make it. And so I threw together an overnight bag and I hopped in the car and I had that long 9 hour drive across Kansas to wonder if I would make it in time. And in all that time alone in the car, I found myself thinking about the man that my grandpa was, what I admired about him. What are the things I would want to say to him if I had a chance and that I would regret not having had the chance to say? By the time I arrived at the hospital, he had kind of miraculously taken a turn for the better. He was sitting up and employing the quiet, dry sense of humor that he was so famous for. And so I caught up with my mom and my grandpa and my cousins and ended up going to bed that night. And before I headed back out here to Colorado the next day, I had an opportunity to go sit with him and tell him everything that I wanted him to know about who he was and how his life had impacted me. But the number one thing that I learned from my papa is that I watched him for his whole life be this man of incredible ability. We would joke that he was the sort of guy that could fix your car and then build you a garage to go around it. It seemed like there was nothing that he couldn't do. And for my whole life, I watched him, whenever it was possible for him to help somebody, he did it. He always helped. I remember there was a time my mom, who was in her late 60s at the time, called my grandpa, who was in his late 80s at the time, because she'd locked herself out of her house. She called him to see if he knew any way to help her get in, and he ended up showing up and shimmying in at, he's almost 90 years old, through the window well into the basement and came up and let her in. I mean, that's the kind of guy that he was. And I admired that so much. And I think that's the story that I'm trying to live up to. When I get to come alongside somebody in a home sale process, right? It is a complex process. It's super emotional. It has dramatic financial implications, and it's where you live. Where you live matters. And it is such an honor and a privilege to me that people would invite me to be a trusted friend and mentor and guide to walk through that process with them. That's what I love about this job, and that's why I keep going.